Our panel this morning, though, Liberal frontbencher Senator Simon Birmingham and Labor's Michelle Rowland. Good morning to you both. Simon Birmingham, first to you. The Prime Minister's copped a bit of flack for not...
I've lost sound.
Good morning, Kieran. I heard the start of your question, but I didn't hear the rest of it, and I don't know whether you or viewers can hear me.
OK, no, I can hear you, Simon, so I'll continue with this question now. Hopefully we can continue without any hiccup. Senator Birmingham, so the Prime Minister this morning was asked about the fact that he hasn't locked in meetings with the head of the World Bank or the IMF. Now, given Australia's hosting the G20 in November, wouldn't those two meetings be two of the more prioritised commitments? Why doesn't the Prime Minister make sure that they happen?
The Prime Minister is running a broad schedule of meetings across both Canada and the United States on this very important delegation and trip that he's undertaking. And it's important from an economic development perspective for Australia as well as a national security perspective. In Canada, he's meeting with the Prime Minister, he's meeting with a range of potential and significant investors in Australia, not least of which the very significant Canadian pension funds, which are so critical. And in the United States, he's meeting with the President, with the Foreign Secretary. He'll be meeting with the heads of the Federal Reserve, of the Federal Treasury. He indeed hopes to meet with the heads of the IMF and the World Bank. These, of course, are a range of very significant meetings and institutions. And the only people who are looking a bit silly at present, frankly, are the Labor Party and Tanya Plibersek in particular, for what really are some schoolyard comments that have been made about this trip, when in reality the Prime Minister is doing the heavy lifting in Canada and the United States to develop Australia's economic interests and secure our national security interests well into the future.
Well, Michelle Rowland, the quote that Simon Birmingham is referring to there is Tanya Plibersek yesterday saying the Prime Minister looks like Nigel No Friends, was the way she put it yesterday on the world stage, and that Australians would be worried that he's going to embarrass us on the world stage. Now, isn't that a bit much, given that the PM is meeting with Stephen Harper, the Canadian Prime Minister, tomorrow? He's got the President, the White House talks later in the week, the Secretary of State, as Senator Birmingham said. High-level talk, surely on a Prime Ministerial schedule, it's hard to meet with every single senior person that one might hope to.
Kieran, it is quite extraordinary that on this trip it doesn't appear that meetings have been locked in with the head of the World Bank or the IMF. And we need to remember what this is a precursor to. Australia is holding the G20 later in the year, an event that is going to cost in the vicinity of about $500 million, incredibly important for Australia's economic future. And it is extremely important for the Prime Minister to make sure that he's meeting with those bodies. And I do find it extraordinary, still I see we're hearing comment that nothing's been firmly locked in yet. Well, I do hope that something does get locked in, but it seems quite strange that one would get on a plane to the other side of the world and not have these very important ones locked in. And I point to the fact that Christine Lagarde, for example, has commented that Australia was a pioneer in the area of climate change as an economic issue. One wonders whether Tony Abbott wants to have that discussion with Christine Lagarde, but for Australia's sake, I believe that we should.
Is climate change the reason why the PM's not meeting with a couple of these world figures, Senator Birmingham?
Emphatically no, Kieran. It's not very long at all since the Prime Minister last met with Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF. So in fact the idea that he doesn't want to meet with these figures is just ridiculous. And the Prime Minister is running a busy schedule when he's in the United States. He's not only meeting with a range of economic leaders, as I said, not just President Obama, but also the Secretary of State. He's meeting with the head of the US Treasury. He's meeting with the head of the Federal Reserve. He hopes to have these other meetings. He's also holding a range of national security meetings with the major intelligence agencies and organisations in the United States as well. It is a full and busy schedule with people who are also very busy individuals themselves. I can't imagine what it's like putting a schedule like that together, but I am quite confident that the Prime Minister is pursuing the best interests of Australia, and in doing so, he is making sure that he gets the balance right between our economic interests and our national security interests, and the Labor Party is just looking childish and puerile with these types of attacks, which frankly don't do anything to help Australia's standing on the international stage.
He said this morning that he has a like-minded approach to Stephen Harper. Of course he does. They're both from centre-right parties. That's the Canadian Prime Minister. Senator Birmingham, is it going to be an easier set of talks with Stephen Harper than with Barack Obama later in the week, given they have a very different worldview, President Obama and Prime Minister Abbott?
The national interests of Australia and the United States, as with Australia and Canada, are very strong, very strongly aligned, and the bonds of our countries are so great that in any instance our leaders always get along well, always work very well together. I have no doubt that President Obama will look forward to coming to Australia for the G20 later this year. I have no doubt that he is pleased and welcomes and will participate fully in the priority that Prime Minister Abbott has set around economic development for the world as part of those G20 discussions, and that we will continue to advance cooperation on the whole range of fronts that Australia has such a long history of working with the United States on, not least of which in the continued strengthening of our national security relations between the two countries. Which
underpins the whole relationship, doesn't it, Michelle Rowland? So Senator Birmingham is right in when he asserts that these two, particularly in the United States, among our closest allies in the world.
Indeed, Australia has a very special and deep relationship with the United States, that's for sure. It will be very interesting, however, to hear the discussions that do take place around climate change, particularly in light of the recently announced policy by the Obama administration, compared to what is being sought to be pursued here in Australia, which is not a scheme that is based on markets, not a scheme that recognises that climate change is an economic issue. And it would be very interesting, and I think the Prime Minister would do well to take note of what the President's views are in this regard and hopefully bring them back to Australia.
And nothing, Michelle, that President Obama has announced looks remotely like the type of carbon tax that you and your party advocate.
Well, why don't you articulate your direct action policy and we'll see what President Obama thinks of that. And maybe if you find an economist or an environmentalist that agrees with it, bring them along as well.
It's very clearly articulated. A white paper is out there now giving all of the details for the $2.55 billion worth of investment that comes.
I look forward to you articulating that in the wider community and the wider community agreeing with you, which I don't think we're going to see.
Michelle Rowland, Senator Birmingham, we've got to go to a break. We'll be back in just a moment.
It's what we do. When friends are away, you roll up your sleeves and keep an eye on things. When your sister has the flu, you roll up your sleeves and pitch in. When someone's broken down, you roll up your sleeves and lend a hand. So what would you do if they needed blood? 1 in 3 of all the people you meet, know and care about will need a life-saving blood donation in their lifetime. 1 in 3. Please, don't put it off. Roll up your sleeves and give blood.
Have you been up all night? I'm looking for hotel deals. Why didn't you just go to Hotels Combined? They compare hundreds of travel sites in seconds.
Hotels Combined.
Find the best price in seconds at hotelscombined.com.
If I told you there's an issue that costs Australian business $10.9 billion every year and likely affects 1 in 5 of your people, wouldn't you want to uncover it? And if you knew that every dollar invested in addressing it returned $2.30, could you ignore it? Make your people happier and more productive. Go to headsup.org.au.
To clean a load of washing takes on average 90 minutes. A shower, about 10 minutes. To clean your teeth, 3 minutes. But to clean your toilet, Harpic Power Plus starts working in seconds. Its rapid action formula combines speed and powerful cleaning. And to keep your loo fresh in between cleans, try new Harpic Power Plus foaming system cleaning blocks. It works with rapid action to clean with every flush.
Sick of recurring colds? Help reduce the frequency of colds and your number of sick days with Inner Health Immune Booster for adults and Immune Booster for kids. Because there's better things to do than be sick.
Have you been up all night? I'm looking for hotel deals. Why didn't you just go to Hotels Combined? They compare hundreds of travel sites in seconds.
Hotels Combined.
Find the best price in seconds at hotelscombined.com.
If I told you there's an issue that costs Australian business $10.9 billion every year and likely affects 1 in 5 of your people, wouldn't you want to uncover it? And if you knew that every dollar invested in addressing it returned $2.30, could you ignore it? Make your people happier and more productive. Go to headsup.org.au.
These first edition headlines are brought to you by Officeworks, where over 20,000 products could be tax deductible. So take a tax break at Officeworks by June 30.
This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me this morning. Labor frontbencher Michelle Rowland and Parliamentary Secretary for the Environment, Senator Simon Birmingham. Michelle Rowland, I want to ask you about the front page of the Australian newspaper, the story there, Senate threat to Abbott's tax plans. It refers to Bob Day and Senator-elect, as of July 1 anyway, David Leonhelm from the Liberal Democratic Party. Both of these senators-to-be are basically saying that they don't want to revoke the Labor Party tax cuts due to come into effect July 1 next year. Now, if the government does revoke the carbon tax, surely it's prudent for Labor, fiscally prudent for Labor to back the plan to revoke these tax cuts.
I note the arguments that have been advanced here that, well, this was brought in as part of the carbon pricing assistance package. And given that the government came in saying that they were going to abolish the carbon tax but keep the assistance, you can understand the argument that's being advanced by these incoming senators. But I will point this out too, Kieran. These were changes that were made to primarily assist with the cost of living. That was the policy background, but also particularly to benefit low-income earners through increasing that tax-free threshold. So it seems quite strange that a government who was elected on the promise of no new taxes, having broken that promise, is now seeking to undo that work.
Senator Birmingham, it's not only proving difficult, the budget, politically, but also in terms of the bottom line here. This could blow a $700 million revenue hole in the budget, a further hole in the budget, which the government's already struggling in terms of some of your big savings measures to get them through the parliament.
Well, Kieran, we're determined to work constructively with the crossbenchers to get our budget through the parliament, and we'll do that in a calm and sensible way, dealing directly with them. But I think the policy issue here does need to be more clearly understood, and some of the lies that Michelle was just telling need to be set very clearly here too. That we went to the election saying absolutely we would repeal the carbon tax and that people would keep the compensation that had already been delivered to them. And that was the case, and that is exactly what we are seeking to legislate to do. We also were very clear pre-election in our costings documents and all other documents that were released that these future tax cuts would not actually be part of what we intended to deliver because we knew that we had a big task ahead of us to get the budget in balance. Now, what's amazing is that the Labor Party pre-election as well also said they were going to defer these tax cuts. Wayne Swan banked it as a budget-saving measure himself. So what Michelle and the rest of the Labor Party have to explain is why pre-election they thought the country could not afford these changes to the tax thresholds, but post-election they're now opposing them. Part of some $40 billion worth of savings measures Labor says it's going to oppose, but importantly part of $5 billion worth of savings measures Labor pre-election said it was going to implement, but now is opposing. So why, Michelle, have you changed your mind?
I'll get back to Michelle in just a moment, but I want to ask you, and Michelle Rowland can respond to that in a second, but I want to ask you as well about not just the crossbench, but your own fellow MPs, again speaking out against one of the big commitments of the Abbott government, and that is the paid parental leave scheme. John Williams of the National Party, again in the Fairfax papers today, calling on the Prime Minister to put the PPL scheme on ice and adopt a compromise. Keep Labor's scheme possibly for longer, to 26 weeks, but keep that minimum wage scheme in place. That's one way you could make some pretty big savings and do them quickly, Senator Birmingham, for the Prime Minister to relent on that.
Well, the Prime Minister's already made some changes to the paid parental leave scheme, but importantly, this is a scheme that we took to 2 elections. It's a scheme that was very clearly part of our policy, and it's a scheme that does deliver a lot of assistance to people on low incomes as well, especially around regional parts of Australia, but right across Australia, women who take time out, having had a child, will see significant benefits from receiving their actual wage for 6 months. A lot of women at present in lower paid jobs who only then get the minimum wage for an 18-week period will see real benefits, and it really is about delivering on a proper workplace entitlement that is appropriate to 2014.
Let's bring in Michelle Rowland now. Your thoughts, well, I guess first of all the challenge from Senator Birmingham that you're getting some of the facts wrong when it comes to the carbon tax and the prior commitments of the government, and then you can respond to the PPL, which as the government has made the case many times that this is a workplace entitlement.
Well, Senator Birmingham's got more front than mire accusing other people of lying. This was a government that lied its way into government. This was a government who promised, even the night before the election, to maintain a number of key commitments, and they've broken every one of them. And you don't even have to take it from me. You walk around the streets, you get people talking about the unfairness of this budget, but I will move on. I'll move on firstly to the issue about tax cuts. Well, this is a government that has to end up dealing with these crossbenchers. This is a government that has to decide
how about the Labor Party's position, Michelle?
What priorities are important for them. This is a government that has to decide whether or not it wants to keep to its own commitments prior to the election of maintaining the assistance
what about
that
what
was
you
in
said
place.
Prior to the election?
Maintaining the assistance that was in place. Now to the PPL scheme. How extraordinary to hear Senator Birmingham coming on here again talking about the PPL being taken to 2 elections. Well, it was taken to 2 elections. Maybe you need to educate some of your own people on your team about whether or not they support this. Time and again we see not only Senator Williams, we've seen members of the House of Representatives saying they are going to cross the floor on this issue. This is a friendless policy which ignores even the fact that we already have in place a paid parental leave scheme that is working. And if you want to talk about priorities and what we should have in place, well, look at how much this is costing. Don't even start talking about tax cuts and what sort of a hole you reckon that's going to blow in the budget when you're blowing billions on this friendless scheme that even the Liberals and the Nationals don't want.
I want to move on finally, Michelle Rowland. I want to ask you for your thoughts on these reports via the ABC, more suggestions of claims of abuse within the ADF and implicating, allegedly, according to the reports to be aired tonight, serving officers. This seems to be a never-ending story. This an endemic problem, and we, as I say, it seems to be that we are faced with these claims on a regular basis. How can this be dealt with once and for all?
It does appear to be, unfortunately, quite a systemic issue, and we've seen that arising from the previous inquiries that have been conducted. And I think everyone in the Parliament wants to see this addressed and addressed in the long term. And we would look forward indeed to seeing measures that are brought in, these issues assessed, measures brought in to deal with it once and for all. And it does unfortunately appear that there has been a culture that has needed to change in the armed services, and Labor would certainly support measures that go towards that.
But yeah, Senator Birmingham, it doesn't seem to matter what efforts are made, what reports are done, that further allegations emerge. We don't have a lot of detail of these at the moment, but certainly on the surface the suggestions are yet again concerning.
Kieran, there must be a zero tolerance approach taken to abuse within the ADF. We expect our Defence Forces to uphold a high standard, and of course overwhelmingly they do an incredible job in serving our country and serving our country in the most difficult of circumstances. But where there are rotten elements in those Defence Forces, they must be weeded out, they must receive appropriate punishment, and we've heard very strong language from the Chief of Army over the last couple of years and from the Chief of Defence Force and others about the need to make sure they tackle these issues seriously and that they do get to the core of any problems. And I have confidence in the leadership of our Defence Forces that they are instigating programs of reform that will make a difference for the long run, and that many of these issues, sadly, of course, we're dealing with are problems in the past. They've got to be cleaned up. They've got to be addressed, but in the future we have to make sure there's a zero tolerance approach throughout the ranks of the Defence Forces.
Senator Birmingham, Michelle Rowland, thank you both for that this morning. A quick break from AM Agenda, back in just